All right, looks like we've got 18 people in the meeting right now. I think in order to not run over time and to give Ed the appropriate amount of time to cover this topic, we'll kick it off and get it started. Just as a brief introduction to Ed, Ed has represented and advised small, medium, and large organizations regarding all aspects of their labor and employment relations. And he has also provided strategic business development counsel to hundreds of companies, not-for-profits, government entities, and individuals over the past several decades. Ed has been doing this for about 25 years and has represented clients in both mediations and arbitrations. He is a Florida Supreme Court Circuit Court mediator and a Florida Supreme Court qualified arbitrator. We are really lucky to have Ed come and speak to us about the COVID mandates that are about to come out or have kind of come out and are in the process of being implemented. And we especially want to thank one of our key sponsors, Gunster, who has made Ed available to do this topic. I did see on Ed's bio, hopefully you all took a chance to read that Ed also worked for the Labor Relations Board in one of my old hometowns in Denver, Colorado. So I think, it's great to have someone with a broad base of experience that we have here with Ed. So I think we're all going to learn a lot on this webinar. And just as a reminder, if you do want CPE for this session, you need to answer the polling questions. I don't think you need to answer them all, but it's probably most of them. So, Denise, do you want to pop up the first polling question and we can get it started, and then Ed can take it away? It's going to be an interesting answer on this one. Awesome. So it looks like we have most people, it's pretty much split 50-50. 60% of people are for it, and then, kind of 40% of people will say it's a mixed bag. So I think that pretty much covers a lot of what we're dealing with right now. And this is going to be something that we're going to have to deal with in the future. So thank you very much, Ed. And if you want to kick it off and take it away, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. First of all, everybody, it's a pleasure being here today. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm going to be looking at this from a very unique perspective. And the reason I say unique is because in my career, I have truly been on all sides of this equation with regards to business ownership, working within the business and so forth. I started my career in a production floor in a manufacturing assembly organization. Before I went to school and got my degrees. I have managed and supervised employees in my career outside of the law firm. Along with working for the National Labor Relations Board and being in private practice, I also owned my own manufacturing facility. It was a company that was in bankruptcy, and we took it out of bankruptcy. And so we had 229 employees. And so I understand the situations that a business owner is in when they're making decisions like we are dealing with the vaccine. I found it really interesting that in the poll, it shows that people are for the vaccine, 51%, 49%, I think it was mixed bag, not sure. And the real question that needs to occur that we have to ask ourselves is, why the vaccine? Now, I am very informal, and I'm going to be asking questions of you all also beyond the polling questions. So get ready to unmute as we go forward, because I'm going to need your input. So before we have a better understanding of the legal considerations and the non-legal considerations, we have to understand where we started. And so actually before that, I also want to share with you one thing that's very important, because we are talking about COVID. COVID touched me personally. In January 5th of this year, I was positive for COVID. I went to Tallahassee, dropped my daughter off at FSU, and 48 hours later, I tested positive for COVID. On the 9th of January, I was put into the hospital and did not get out of the COVID unit until February 28th. In fact, a week after I got there, we were touch and go whether I would be here speaking with you today. Then got out, was on oxygen for March, part of April, got off the oxygen in May, and then had a relapse in June, not because I got COVID again, but because the COVID actually, when I got COVID, I had a double bacterial pneumonia, I had blood clots, and then I went septic. And so I'm glad to be here today, actually. But because of that, I understand the importance of all the different measures. If you notice, I didn't say the vaccine. I said all the different measures that are out there that we are utilizing and looking at, the government and business and society with regard to dealing with COVID. So where we want to start with this is the vaccine, because at the end of the day, that's exactly what started the discussion about mandatory vaccination of employees is the vaccine. And if you go back and hit rewind back to, I'm going to call the fall and then the winter of fall of last year, the winter of this year, when the vaccine was first coming out, the public was informed that if you took the vaccine, you would not get COVID again, and you would not be able to transmit COVID. And that is a very, very important starting point, because that created the mindset that we need to get everybody vaccinated. Because if everybody got vaccinated, then it would run itself out and people wouldn't get it and wouldn't get sick, and we wouldn't have COVID today. However, that's not the way it played out, because as we heard and saw 6-7 months ago, towards the late spring, early summer of this year, it was determined that people who got vaccinated still had the ability to get COVID and to transmit COVID. Even people who vaccinated could have no symptoms and then transmit COVID to others. And that is a huge distinguishing point between the two, where we started, what our mindset was when we started, and then where we are today. The reason I share that with you is because when we look at, should we mandate the vaccine, we need to consider certain parameters. First of all, it's important to understand that by getting vaccinated, it does not mean that you are not going to transmit it or get it, as I mentioned previously. And so when you do the vaccine, the question then becomes why? Why would we mandate a vaccine? And I think if you look back and look deep and do a deep dive into the issue, you'll realize that while we started on the premise that getting it means that COVID will come to an end because you won't get it again and it won't be transferable, the dynamics that changed in April changed the reasoning why people are pushing vaccination, both the government and employers. So if you get vaccinated, we know that if you get COVID again, the probabilities of you ending in the hospital the way I was in January and February is very low. The probabilities are very low that you'll be hospitalized. You'll get sick like the flu, you may be out for a week or so, but chances are you're going to be okay. If you don't get vaccinated, you could end up like myself. And I actually ended up with fibrosis because of the COVID. And so that situation has a tremendous cost. And so that really becomes the turning point, because we don't want our employees to get sick the same way the government doesn't want its citizens to get sick. But there's an underlying cost to people who do get sick, either through our health insurance or through the government's programs. And so a lot of folks do not want to come out and just say, hey, this really isn't about people in general. It's about the cost that goes with that. So there's a lot of organizations that at first wanted to mandate it so that we could just eliminate COVID overall. And now with the issue of your ability to get COVID and to transmit COVID, now it becomes a different reason, or could become a different reason that needs to be considered. So let's talk about what happened. So on September 9th of this year, President Biden comes out with what he calls the 6 points of a comprehensive national strategy to combat COVID. 4 of those prongs deal with us in the workplace. The first prong is requiring all employers with 100 or more employees to ensure that their workers are vaccinated or tested weekly. The second part of that is requiring vaccination for all federal workers and federal contractors and subcontractors for the government. The third point is requiring COVID-19 vaccinations in the healthcare system for healthcare workers that where the organization takes Medicare or Medicaid, they participate in those programs. And then you have other issues that requiring employers to provide paid time off to get vaccinated. And so what I like to do is start taking apart these different considerations from a legal perspective. So when we look at the legal considerations, we know that right now, through executive order, there is a mandate for all federal contractors and subcontractors to have their employees vaccinated. And that does not require the Capitol Hill, the Senate, or the House. It's through an executive order, people doing business with the government. Through healthcare, they did the same thing. They did what they call ETS, which we'll talk about in a moment, but nobody really banned it because it's Medicaid and Medicare, so they're getting federal monies. And then we have the issue now of the private sector, which is the issue of vaccinating those employers that have 100 plus or more employees. And where do we go from there? Like, what's happening? So for us to get an understanding of that issue, it's important to understand that certain, let me rephrase this. So there are going to be certain requirements with regards to this issue of mandating vaccines and testing. Number one, if you force to mandate the vaccine, there are 2 exceptions to the rule. One is an accommodation for healthcare reasons. The other is an accommodation for religious reasons. Those are the 2 exemptions, the ones that get you out of the mandatory vaccine. The other issue that then you have is the issue of the testing. And again, the testing issue is the part when you don't mandate it, or you have people who are exempt because of healthcare reasons or religious reasons, then you have to do the testing. And it has to be at least once a week. The person has to get tested. There are a lot of questions as to who pays for the test, who pays for the employee's time to go take the test. If it's not a rapid result, because again, the rapid result versus the long-term test, it has a statistics for better or more accuracy. Those are the issues that need to be, that are also being raised. So what I look at is I say, okay, when the vaccines first came out, we knew what we thought was going to happen. Now we know you can still get vaccinated and get sick and transmit it. And now the government is saying, we want to force all employers to vaccinate. And when you look at that, they would prefer us to force mandate vaccination versus going and saying to people, we're going to test you over and over again. And to stop that part of the testing over, they made it weekly. The rule, or the rumor is it's going to come down the pike, is that they're going to force the employer to pay for the test. If somebody has a bad reaction to the test, for the time frame that the person is out because of the being not feeling well, the employer will have to pay for that time. So there's a lot of cost considerations here. The other issue that we have is if we mandate the test and somebody does have a reaction and we only have to pay for the time off, that's already a hardship because that's a lot of money that could be going out the door. But then the other issue that you have is that if somebody has a really bad reaction to it and ends up in the hospital, how is that covered? The government is not going to cover it. Is it covered through your health insurance? Is it covered through workers' comp? Those are issues that are going to be coming out as things start moving along. So when we look at the mandating of the vaccine, we need to look at why we're doing it, and then what the options are. Administratively, I can tell you, having been in HR, administratively, if you only have 2 or 3 people that aren't vaccinated, that's easy to administer. You have 500 employees, 200 employees, 300 employees, and you got 30% of them not vaccinated. Just every week having to test, every week keeping that administration of the records and everything else is very, very difficult. We're going to have to double up HR departments just to be able to manage this from a clerical standpoint. And then what if somebody took a test and we don't have it and we're forcing them to take a test? There's just so many administrative issues that can arise from this. And so those are the things that we need to be considering. The other part of it is an employee relations issue. And that is that there are a lot of people who don't believe in the vaccination, or they've had COVID and they have the antibodies. And so they're questioning, why do I have to take a vaccine if I already have the antibodies? And then there's just some people who just don't like the fact of being told what to do. And it's not a matter of not being anti-vaxxers. They just believe in free will and the right to choose for yourself what they want injected or put into their bodies, or how they're being tested. So those are all the things that are, as employers, we are considering. Now, think about this. Let's talk about the governments and let me see how I can move this slide here.
Ed, can we take a quick second for a polling question?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Wow. Okay. Are we close at the end of the poll?
Yep, in the poll,
So we've got
sharing the results.
83% have not done mandatory vaccinations, and 17% have. Well, I got a feeling that's going to be changing really soon. Let's talk about how we have tried to get people vaccinated before the upcoming mandates. We tried through incentives. Companies were raffling, giving out cards, $25 gift certificates to Walmart, Visa cards, giving a day off if you got vaccinated. There were a lot of incentives that were put in place early on, trying to motivate employees to get vaccinated. And they worked. A lot of companies saw 20, 30, 40% increases in folks being vaccinated. The talk that we're seeing now is, and people what they're putting now into place, is what we're going to call the consequences. And we call that in insurance business I used to own an insurance agency, a surcharge. Well, people started talking about surcharge, and they said, okay, if you put in place a surcharge where you charge somebody for not getting vaccinated, is that legal? Can you do that? And if you look at the law, the regulations, the statutes, look at the cases, it says that you cannot create a surcharge for people who are not vaccinated or unwilling to get vaccinated. There was one exception in one of the regulations, and that was for smoking. If you recall, back 10 years ago, or about 10 years ago, when the ACA came out, they made an exception, and it was actually specifically labeled smoking, that if you had people who were smoking, you could provide or give them a surcharge on the insurance premiums, on their contribution, because they were smokers. What people don't realize, if you look at that statute when it was first being put together, it had also obesity. And obesity was taken off the table, and smoking was made the only exemption. And there's a million reasons why obesity was taken off the table. Is because first, we as a society, including myself, are considered obese. I have a large population of obesity. And obesity takes on multiple realms. And obesity also manifests itself in multiple medical issues. And it would have been a huge hit to society with a surcharge. So we know we can't surcharge, and we shouldn't be surcharging on insurance premiums for people who have not vaccinated. So then people got creative and said, well, let's do the flip side of that. If we can't create a negative consequence with the surcharge, can we do a discount? And interesting enough, you can do a discount. If you have a wellness program that is a certified program, it's set in place, you can do it. And the reason you can do a premium discount is because it requires the employee to take on some activity. So you'll see a lot of wellness programs will give you a discount if you walk so many steps a day on a continuous basis, if you exercise a certain amount of time, if you go to certain nutritional programs and so forth, you can get a discount, a premium discount on your insurance. So folks were like, well, look, we can do that now too. We can make it an activity to get vaccinated, right? And because we can make it an activity, we can maybe put it on our wellness program and do discounts. And there are a lot of organizations that are discussing it and pushing that discount. But you have to understand that with a wellness program, not only do you have to have an activity for that person, which is the vaccination, but you also have to provide a reasonable alternative standard to qualify for the discount, which means that in the wellness program, if I am unable to do X, I can do X2 and get the discount. Another reasonable alternative to do it. So what have we seen and read with regards to these alternative, reasonable alternative standards to qualify for a discount? And that is wearing a mask. If you attest that you will wear a mask, that is considered an alternative, which means that you can get the discount without getting vaccinated. And you can already see the games that can be played with that. It's very much and very similar to the situation that we have with religious accommodations. See, medical accommodations, there's a scientific basis there. But with religious accommodations, it's different. We used to say, the theory used to be that it had to be a real religion, as people used to call it, a real religion. And now it's really a sincere belief, a sincere commitment. So the whole aspect of a truly structured religious organization or theory or base is that definition has changed. It's gotten very, very wide. So you're seeing a lot of individuals, employees who do not want to get vaccinated through a mandatory vaccine program, saying, well, I have this serious conviction against vaccination, and for whatever reason. And they say that it's a religious base, it's a belief system, which is a religious base. And so that opening with regards to religious accommodation is huge. Like I tell people, you can get a cruise ship and put it right through the religious accommodation because it's almost impossible to deny it. The only way to deny on the religious is an undue hardship. And that also becomes very difficult to define because you would have to show that by providing the exemption of religious accommodation, it creates such an undue hardship on the organization, either financially or through work processes and efficiencies, because the person isn't vaccinated and they have to have a mask on or whatever, that it would fit the undue definition. And what I find really interesting is the following, and that is that it's very difficult to argue undue hardship when for the last 18 months, we have not been required to mandate vaccines. So people in organizations have been working without a mandate, without being vaccinated for 18 months. We're seeing the numbers starting to drop. And so in certain counties, in certain areas, they've really dropped a lot. It's hard to mandate a vaccine when we're seeing that it wasn't a hardship before by people not being vaccinated. So those are things that need to be considered. So we have the issue of the incentives that we've tried, and we weren't totally successful at that. We know that we can't do a surcharge. We can do a discount on premiums, but when you do discount on premiums, you have to understand that there's that alternative, reasonable alternative qualification that needs to be part of that. And so we have that push and pull theory from that approach, which leads us now to our next slide, which is the government directives. And we need to really understand what's happening here. The president has the power to initiate executive orders. The president has the ability to say, if you're doing work with federal government, these are what the requirements are going to be. And that's what all presidents have done in all the presidencies throughout the establishment of our country. However, there is a provision in OSHA that also has the ability to impose upon employers a directive, and it's rarely used. It's very rarely used. The last time it was used was 40 years ago, and that was for asbestos in 1983. It's only been used 6 times in history. Of the 6 times, only once did it survive a court challenge, but it is a method of getting something done without the legislation to back it up. And so what we're talking about is an ETS, an emergency temporary standard through OSHA. It's section 6C. And it's kind of interesting that putting into place that mandate through OSHA. And the reason is because when OSHA does ETS, they can impose it for up to 6 months without legal challenge and without having to follow it passing through the Senate or the House. It's an emergency standard that goes in. After the 6 months, within that 6 months, the government is supposed to be working on following all the correct phases of implementing a law as we have in this country, and then continuing the process if the courts overturn it or stop it, or if the House and the Senate put an end to it. But this one is a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. And the reason it's different is the following. When the ETS goes into play, and by the way, OSHA has already completed its regulations. It was completed on October 15th of this year. It went to the office of the OMG, and now they are getting ready to put it in the Federal Register. The time frame is going to be somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we believe. And because between Thanksgiving and Christmas, the rumor is it's going to be pushed off to the beginning of January. But the problem with this ETS, which makes it very complicated, is that it forces the employer to require the employee to get vaccinated. And once you are vaccinated, you cannot become unvaccinated. So what happens is that if the mandate goes through and we mandate everybody to get vaccinated, okay, we either have this issue of testing, which becomes a major issue, or people are forced to get vaccinated. And once you're vaccinated, you can't become unvaccinated, which creates now the second problem that's coming down the road, which is when we have a booster shot, when people say they're against the vaccine or they want to get vaccinated, they're afraid of getting vaccinated, they lose that leverage because they've already been vaccinated once. And if they had no adverse reaction to it, right, it becomes a much more difficult argument, unless it's a religious argument, to say, I don't want to get vaccinated again. And so we see how this manipulation is going on and how this is going to unfold, and where it puts people into a huge dilemma, those that don't want to get vaccinated versus those that do. And you'll hear people, I've heard it because of the groups that I'm involved in, because of my COVID, you'll hear people say, you know, I can't believe you're not getting vaccinated. You're threatening all of us. You're exposing all of us. When in reality, that argument was, like I said at the beginning of the program, it was great 8-9 months ago when we were told vaccination would eliminate your probability, your chances of getting it, of COVID, and transmitting COVID. But because we know that you can still get it and transmit it even with the vaccine, that argument diminishes. Now, it doesn't totally diminish, because by getting a vaccine, there's less chance that you're going to get it and then be able to transmit it. So that's recognized. But we don't know what percentage and what statistically it looks like yet. Because as we look back, we only have 18 months or 2 years of data with regards to vaccines. We have what, 9 months, maybe 10 months of data. So we really don't know how this is all going to play out.
Ed, can we take a break for another polling question?
Sure,
Quickly?
sure.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead. Has your organization considered implementing mandatory vaccines for its employees? 61% yes, 30% no, 6% not sure. Well, it's interesting, folks. That's an interesting statistics or polling question. And the reason I say it is because, you know, one of the things that we're starting to see now is, and this is the other part that people didn't realize, when I got sick, the vaccine wasn't available to me. And so all the cost was not incurred on the employer's health insurance. now that vaccines are available, the health insurance companies are taking, my understanding, are taking more and more of a hit because of the folks that are getting sick, whether vaccinated or not vaccinated. So the reality is that as a business owner, when I owned my company, and like I said, I had 229 employees in a printing company, and I sold the company thereafter. But when you look at yourself as a business owner, of course, I never want any of my employees to get sick, much less as sick as I got during when I had COVID. But also, as a business owner, I also understand the cost of me getting sick. I share with people all the time that so far, year to date, my stay in the hospital has cost almost $800,000. That's a tremendous hit on any insurance, and I'm just one person. There are a lot of people who were in the hospital a lot longer, who were a lot further along, worse than I was. You can only imagine what some of these costs are. I heard from somebody that one of their bills was close to $2.6 million. They were intubated and were in the hospital 4 or 5 months. So you understand that as an employer, wanting to get people vaccinated, a lot of employers are like, wait a second, not only is it good for our employees, if it diminishes the intensity of the sickness, if they get sick, if they get COVID, but also if it diminishes the cost, because me being at home not feeling well for 10 or 14 days or 7 days is a lot different cost factor than me being hospitalized for 2, 3, 4 months and seeing bills anywhere from $500,000 to $3 million due to the illness. So again, it's wearing different lenses. You know, the government talks about everybody getting vaccinated, you don't spread it. We know that's not true. Maybe a less likelihood of spreading because less likelihood of you getting it statistically. But realistically, the government also realizes that it's a tremendous cost for those that are not insured, who show up at the hospital with COVID and maybe in COVID for 3 or 4 months on ventilators, the aftercare. When I got out, I was home, working from home with oxygen on 24/7 for 2 months. I had to go back in June for a week to 10 days. Those are some real major expenses. And from a private sector business owner, or it should be of concern. So there are multiple reasons why we want vaccination. There's a lot of reasons why we don't want vaccination, just because of how we are and our free will to choose. So when you look at this whole picture, it is evolving. A lot of the thoughts that we had no longer exist, or the theories that we had no longer exist, although people will still use those theories to try to make a point today or to push an agenda. As business owners, we have to look at it, not only that we don't want our employees to get ill, but we understand there's a cost factor now, a major cost factor from a health insurance standpoint, as well as the fact that, you know, we come from a country of free choice, and, you know, to impose something on somebody is something that we don't like to do in this country. And I understand that. So those are the things that we are looking at. This will continue to evolve. You know, we have the D variant that's out there. The Lambda variant is from South America, is very deadly also. And this thing is going to morph. We're now going into the flu season. It'll be interesting to see how that works with how that intermingles with COVID. And because it's so new, we don't know medically what COVID can do to our bodies and what this vaccine can do to our bodies on both sides of that equation. For some people, it's a long-term effect like mine, and for others, it's there and gone until more studies are done. Do you want to, Denise, you want to put the next polling question up?
Yes, thank you.
I'm looking at the time here. So the question beyond the legal consideration, has your organization spent time discussing the positive and negative aspects of mandatory vaccinations? And 65 is yes, 24 no, 12 non-committal. You know what? It's kind of interesting because there's another dynamic to this whole thing from a non-legal perspective that we're just starting to get word and hearing and talking about, and that is that we can't find enough employees, enough individuals to hire to fill the vacancies that we have all over this country. You know, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. Staffing is becoming a major issue. And so I was speaking with a client early this morning about 5:30, and they were talking about mandatory vaccination. And the concern is that, you know, they have 150 employees, and there's probably about 8 to 10 employees that have indicated that if the company makes it mandatory, they're going to quit. Well, this company has about 150 employees, but it has about 20 vacancies that it can't fill. A lot of these are skilled trade jobs. And they're thinking to themselves, if we lose these 10 individuals, plus all the other skilled jobs that we have open, it's going to cripple us. And that's another consideration, another issue that needs to be discussed is, you know, if it is mandatory across the board, those who decide to do the testing versus those that decide to enforce the mandate, it's going to be an issue with employees leaving, employees trying to find employment somewhere else. And so that is also a huge consideration that businesses are having today. And that is, does this create another factor driving staffing numbers down and creating even more havoc in us providing our services or our products to our clientele? So that will be another interesting issue to discuss and to see how that kind of unfolds. So what I would like to do is we have a few minutes, we have another 10, 15 minutes. Denise, do you have one more polling question?
I do. Let me pop that one up.
Why don't we put that one up so everybody can get their.
Okay.
Has your organization considered discounting insurance premiums for the employees who have shown proof of vaccination? Wow. Okay. So it looks like most folks have not. And, you know, if you have a wellness program, it may be something you want to consider, but also understand the other aspects of it. As we discussed earlier, it's kind of interesting to me that when I look at COVID, the reality is whether it's COVID or the flu or any disease transmittable through air, you know, the proof of really stopping it or hindering its movement, its transmission, is the wearing of the mask. You know, when two people wear a mask and the appropriate mask and they wear it correctly, the probabilities of transmitting COVID is very low. It's even low if it's just one person wearing it and the other one not wearing it. I find it really interesting, though, as I start reading and continue to read and research, we have these rules that if you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask. And I find that counterintuitive or illogical, because if you're vaccinated and we know that you can still get it, you can still transmit it, why would you not wear a mask simply because you're vaccinated? You know, if the goal is for nobody to get sick and to try to kill off the COVID-19 from appearing in our society, and we know the vaccine is not going to do it, truly the thing that has proven itself to be most effective is the using of masks. So when I start seeing these policies where people are saying, if you're fully vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask, or even partially vaccinated, you've taken one dose, you haven't taken the second dose, if it's a 2-dose vaccine, you don't have to wear a mask. I find it very not logical. It's not a logical process. The other thing too is we see people. I live in Tampa. I was at the Buccaneers game a couple of weeks ago. There are 75,000 people. Very few people were wearing masks, and we were shoulder to shoulder. You'll see a concert at the amphitheater, shoulder to shoulder. Very few people wearing masks. But then we now are required to wear masks to go into a public building or into an office building. There's no rhyme or reason, and that's I think what's creating a lot of the confusion with society, is that you're looking at what's happening, and there's no logical foundation, or there's no logical sequence of what we're seeing, and I don't think that the government is addressing that part of it. I don't think it did before. It's not doing it now. It's just things that are imposed on employers and on organizations, and a lot of it just doesn't make sense. Although we do have scientific data, a little bit of it, to back some of the things that have worked and haven't worked. So what I'd like to do is open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions, or tell me can somebody tell me anything creative that they have come up with at their organizations that is worth considering or looking at? I'd be very interested. I'm sure the group would be very interested to hear what people have to say.
So Ed, this is Rob Taylor, and I had seen a presentation by another attorney who had taken the view that this was not actually a vaccine mandate, it was a testing mandate, and the way to get out of testing was to get a vaccine. And I thought that was a pretty interesting interpretation of that, and it somehow affects the legality of it, because they're not mandating the vaccination. They're saying we're mandating weekly testing, and if you want to avoid the weekly testing, you can get the vaccine.
And that's a great like we're seeing it from a different same coin, different side. But let me ask you a question. How did that attorney talk about the administrative nightmare of the testing, the cost of testing, the record keeping, doing it every week? I mean, if you have a small organization, that may be a lot easier than if you have a large one. You think about how complex just enrollment in insurance is, just keeping up with people's address changes and telephone number changes. Can you imagine the administrative nightmare of all of a sudden you have to test 100 people every week, keep the records, again, the cost potentially, the potential illness thereafter. So it is a really creative way of seeing it, that if you're mandating testing, and to get out of testing, you vaccinate. I don't know if that really resolves at the end of the day the problems that employers are going to be facing one way or the other.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't resolve it. And, his view was just, and that was at the time when the executive order had just been issued. Mm-hmm. But he was saying that the executive order was on firmer legal ground by structuring it that way than it was to mandate a vaccine. And, as far as the cost and the administrative burden, it's just, it is what it is. And the, employers, currently in certain industries have to have employees that are vaccinated for, certain diseases, depending on what they're exposed to at work, like plumbers and things like that. And, right. That it was well within OSHA's established regulatory ability to be able to establish something like this. So he did not see that, the legal challenges were really going to go very far, but that was kind of early days. And
that's interesting. That's a great viewpoint. It's a neat perspective to attack the problem, look at it. Any other questions?
Ed, I see that Audie Pete has his hand raised to ask a question.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you. I work for a Global 50 company, And what's interesting is, I'm assuming it's going to be public. Just while we were on this conversation, they have made the decision that all US-based employees will be required to be fully vaccinated. So just wanted to share that. But my questions that I had during the conversation here is, can you touch on the fact that how the employee's privacy and the employee's freedom is being considered, and it's what some of what you're talking about? Because I understand that executive orders have been used before, but I haven't heard a lot of conversations about the employee's perspective. Also, from a liability of a company with its customers. And we initially heard that they were doing a lot of tracing, and I haven't heard a lot about the tracing and what the results of those tracing were, and how that may be fitting into some of these decisions and like that they're going through. Again, what's the liability of a company if somehow if they're able to trace it back to an employee of that company?
Well, it's interesting. Let's talk about the tracing really quick. You know, tracing becomes very difficult to put, to be able to focus on one organization or one individual, because unless that person lives in a cave, they are out in the community, whether they're buying groceries or getting gas. So it's very difficult to say, well, this is where I got it. We can say that we think this is where we got it. For example, in my situation, I drove my daughter to FSU in Tallahassee, and she is an assistant RA. So she had to be there 10 days early. It was right after the new year. There was nobody in the university. We ran into absolutely nobody when we moved her in. We went out to eat at a Mexican restaurant, and those of us that went out to eat in the family all got sick. Within 48 hours, we were all testing positive. 72 hours, we were testing positive, and we all were feeling it. So I know that I got sick in Tallahassee. I believe that I got sick in that restaurant. Who in that restaurant would have given it to me? I don't know. Everybody was masked. We counted 22 people in the restaurant before we sat down, because the vaccine wasn't out. And so we had tables between people. But the reality is, you know, it could have been me walking to go use the restroom somewhere. I know I filled up the car for gas on the way up and on the way back. So it could have been at the pump. I wasn't really paying attention whether there were people next to me on the other side of the pump or not. I wasn't looking for that. But I'm assuming that somebody may have been near me that I didn't know at the time. They may have walked by me. I don't know how I got it. And because you can't trace it to that amount of detail, the issue of liability becomes very difficult to prove.
I agree.
And for your issue of privacy, that's one of the big issues that everybody's talking about. And that is, you know, our personal rights. And where is that balance between my personal right to choose versus the societal good? And when the thought and the theory was that you get vaccinated and you will not be able to get it again, and you would not be able to transmit it, then that societal factor weighed a lot heavier in my eyes than the personal right issue. But when all of a sudden we now know that you can get vaccinated and still get it and still transmit it, what the vaccine does is diminishes the impact on your own personal body.
Exactly.
Now that private right argument, societal argument starts to waver a little bit. But there is some data and statistics that show that by getting the vaccine, you lower the probability of you getting it. It's just no official study, I don't think, has come out to show exactly what that percentage is.
Similar to the flu. Yep, I agree. Thank you.
Any other questions? So I think Sabrina has her hand up.
There. So we've been toying with the idea of using ADP to track administratively the testing and vaccines. And I was just curious if anybody else had started to explore that within their payroll vendors. The interesting thing about the product is currently it's anonymous, so I can't see, I can assign certain people to do the survey, but I can't see who is responding to what. So we've had some instances where they say, yeah, we have a negative test, but they don't upload the picture, and there's no way for me to go back to that person and say, hey, I still need your negative test result. So just curious if anybody else is using their payroll product in the same way.
Is there anybody out there that is using it?
No, the only thing we did was we had to send in a email to just a specific email site, and probably thousands of responses to it. But that's the only way that they're tracking it currently.
I've been told at my company, we did a similar survey. I've been told at my company that certain levels within HR would be able to see the names. But I didn't get a commitment on that, and I don't understand how that ever, it was supposed to be an anonymous survey, so I don't know how that ever turned out.
Yeah, there was a question that was posed: can companies put employees on indefinite unpaid leave if not vaccinated? No testing option offered. I think that's going to get you in deep trouble, because at the end of the day, an indefinite leave or unpaid leave is going to be seen as almost a termination based on that, not getting a vaccine and not testing. So I don't believe that that's going to be a valid method to deal with the problem. I think that's going to go down the same road of, creating a lot of legal issues for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think this is a no-win situation for corporations right now, because, for example, if you mandate the vaccine, somebody has a bad reaction to it and passes away. As far as I know, there's even if it's an executive order based, it does not provide any legal protection to a corporation from being sued later on in the court system. And this is gonna, another 6 months down the road or a year, this is gonna be, there could be thousands of lawsuits.
Let me just share this. We are seeing lawsuits being filed all over the country. And one of the things we talk about with my friends and colleagues who are all attorneys is that it's kind of like the Titanic. All we're seeing is the tip of the iceberg in the water. And that's not what sank the Titanic. It was the ice underneath the water. As they say, we ain't seen nothing yet.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to see a tremendous amount of lawsuits. I think that we're going to see lawsuits coming from every corner, from every different lens that you can imagine. And there's going to be a lot of courts that will be countering each other. We're going to be dealing with this for a long, long time. A long time. And that's what happens when, and again, I understand the situation. That's what happens when something comes up, like the pandemic came in so quickly, and it was a major impact and a major scare, and people were just reacting. If you recall, March of 2020 through June, July of 2020, it seems like the rules of engagement with regards to COVID was literally changing every other day. Every other day, whether it was state or federal or local, there was continuous change occurring, and just keeping up with the change was difficult, much less trying to implement something. So, in those times of panic or chaos, we're going to have a lot of lawsuits, and it's unfair to employers. It's unfair for employers because 18 months from now, or 12 months, 18, 24 months from now, when the lawsuits start to fly, people are going to be talking about, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Well, that's no different than you getting pissed off at a quarterback. Why didn't you see the receiver open? Well, it's easy for us. We're in a recliner with a beer in our hand, having a chip with some dip, right? And we're seeing a camera view from the top of the stadium. You're not on the ground with 6, 7 guys that weigh 300 some pounds wanting to tear your head off in literally 1.8 to 2.6 seconds. So, it's unfair to criticize the conduct of an employer trying to make decisions in a turbulent environment. 18 months from now, when everybody's second guessing us, saying, well, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Well, I wish I could put a cord in my head, in my brain, and connect it to everybody else who's in that courtroom, so they can understand the number of issues that were being raised by the second as this thing was panning out. And unfortunately, our system is set up that way. And that is that we will be second guessed. It'll be 18 months from now when information is much more available and relevant to what it was a year ago, March of 2020. And I guarantee you that we'll have a bunch of people second guessing everything that we did or try to do, even if we had the best of intentions or with the best of intentions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ed. We're a little bit past our time here, so I want to be respectful and let everybody get back to their day jobs. It seems like we may need to do another one of these when we get closer to everything being issued. Just as a final reminder to everybody, on November 16th, we've got our local company event coming up at Top Golf, which is in person. You will be able to talk to hear a presentation from the Top Golf head of sales, as well as maybe hit a few balls. December 1st is our holiday social at the Tampa Yacht Club. January 25th is our annual economic update with Dr. Sean Snaith, which is at the Hilton in St. Pete, Carolyn Park. And we've also just announced our February event on February 24th. We have a local company event at J.C. Newman Cigar Company. For anyone that hasn't been there, that's an historic Tampa company, and it's a great tour to be able to go and do their facilities. So thanks everybody for taking time out of your day and joining us on this. And thank you particularly, Ed and Gunster, for putting this on.
Thank you for allowing us the opportunity. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. And thanks, Denise, for everything.